There's a moment in every society when the law stops protecting people and starts protecting power. And when that happens, something ancient awakens in the human psyche, not justice, something darker, something that wears justice's face but feeds on vengeance. Today we're diving into three people who became living symbols of a terrifying question. What happens when someone stops believing in the system and becomes their own law? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. These weren't villains, they were created, forged in the furnace of a system so corrupt, so ruthless, that entire populations began to cheer for their crimes. This is the story of how monsters are made, and why we sometimes call them heroes. Brazil, 1897. Australia, 1865. India, 1960s. 3 different countries, 3 different centuries, but the same invisible machinery grinding in the background, systems of control that promised order but delivered cruelty. In each place, there existed a social architecture designed not to serve the people, but to serve those who already had power. Wealthy landowners who owned the law, colonial authorities who punished poverty as a crime, a caste system that treated human beings as expendable based on birth. And at the bottom of these systems lived people who followed the rules, who worked the land, who believed, naively, that if they just did the right thing, justice would protect them. But justice is a story we tell ourselves, and when that story collapses, when the law reveals itself as a weapon of the powerful, something breaks inside the human soul. Nietzsche once wrote, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster." But what if the real question is, what happens when the system itself is the monster? In the Brazilian backlands, 1916, a 19-year-old boy named Virgulino Ferreira watched his father beaten nearly to death by police officers, not for breaking the law, but for existing in the way of wealthy landowners called coronéis. His father had tried the legal route, moved twice, obeyed every rule. And in 1921, those same police returned and shot his father dead. Virgulino ran through the brush with bullets whipping past his head, watching his home burn behind him. He had been taught his whole life to be good, to trust the system, and the system had murdered his family. So he stopped being good. He joined a gang of bandits called cangateiros and quickly earned the name Lampião, the lantern, because he could shoot a lever-action rifle so fast his muzzle flashed like a flickering lamp in the darkness. At first, he targeted the wealthy. He robbed their estates, burned their properties, and the poor began to whisper his name with reverence. Here was someone who fought back. But here's where the psychology gets dark. Revenge is never satisfied. It's a fire that consumes everything, including the one who lights it. Lampião met a woman named Maria Bonita, beautiful, fierce, the first female cangateira. Together they became Brazil's Bonnie and Clyde, sticking it to the oligarchs. Until slowly, imperceptibly, the line between justice and brutality dissolved. He began torturing victims, publicly beheading people in town squares. The boy who wanted a simple farm life had become the thing he hated most, a man who ruled through fear. In 1938, police ambushed him at dawn. He and Maria Bonita died together in a hail of bullets. But the authorities weren't done. They decapitated all 11 gang members, preserved the heads in kerosene, and toured them through towns like a circus to break the spirit of anyone who might follow in his footsteps. The heads weren't buried for 31 years. Australia, 1865. An 11-year-old boy named Ned Kelly jumps into a creek and saves a drowning child. He's given a bright green sash as a reward, a symbol of heroism he'll wear until his death. But Ned's father is an Irish ex-convict, and in colonial Australia that means the family is marked. The British authorities watch them constantly, waiting for them to slip. When a calf wanders onto their land, Ned's starving father kills it to feed his children. The police drag him away for cattle theft. He's sentenced to hard labor, returns broken, and drinks himself to death within months. At 12 years old, Ned becomes the man of the house. 7 siblings, no money, no options. He falls in with a bushranger named Harry Power, learns to steal horses, gets caught, and is sentenced to 3 years of hard labor for a crime he didn't technically commit. When he gets out, he tries to go straight, but no one will hire him. His reputation is a prison with invisible bars. In 1878, a drunken cop shows up at the Kelly house trying to arrest Ned's younger brother. There's a scuffle. The cop gets shot in the hand. The police arrest Ned's mother and sentence her to 3 years of hard labor. Ned offers a trade. Take us, let her go. The police refuse. And that's the moment Ned Kelly realizes the truth. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed to crush people like him. So he forms the Kelly gang, ambushes the police who come hunting, and kills 3 officers. The government responds by passing a law declaring him an outlaw, meaning anyone can shoot him on sight. But instead of hiding, Ned does something astonishing. He robs banks and performs trick-riding shows for the hostages. He burns mortgage documents and lectures captives on police corruption. He writes a manifesto. He becomes a folk hero. In his final stand in 1880, Ned and his gang craft crude armor from plough steel, 98 pounds each, and walk out to face the police in a shootout that feels like mythology. Bullets ricochet off his chest. He keeps walking, firing, until an officer shoots him in the legs and brings him down. At 25 years old, Ned Kelly is hanged. 32,000 people sign a petition to save him. It fails. His last words, "Such is life." Beneath his armor, they found the green sash from his childhood, the symbol of the boy who saved a life, worn by the man who took many. India, 1960s. A young girl named Phoolan Devi sits in a field eating chickpeas from plants that used to belong to her family until relatives stole the land and bribed officials to change the records. When she's discovered there, she's beaten severely. Her family, terrified of further violence, arranges her marriage to a much older man while she's still a child. The marriage involves serious abuse that she attempts to resist. She becomes ill, moves between relatives' homes, returns to her village. When she rejects unwanted advances from a village leader's relative, she's beaten again. The cycle of violence continues. She's sent away, then abandoned. When she returns and confronts family members over destroyed crops, authorities arrest her. While in custody, she experiences extreme brutality and violations. She's then taken by bandits whose leader treats her as property and subjects her to ongoing violence. Everything changes when Vikram, the gang's second in command, intervenes. He removes the abusive leader and treats Phoolan with basic human dignity. For the first time in her life, someone shows her respect. They form a partnership. He trains her in survival skills. Together they conduct raids targeting those from privileged castes who'd exploited the poor. But Vikram is killed by rival gang members, men from higher castes who then capture Phoolan and subject her to public humiliation designed to destroy her will. When she escapes, something fundamental breaks inside her. She forms a new group, returns to that village, demands those responsible for her humiliation be brought forward. When the village refuses, she makes a decision. 22 men from privileged families, men who'd witnessed her suffering and done nothing, are led to the river. They're executed there. 20 die, 2 survive to tell what will be called the Behmai massacre. She evades capture for years, protected by lower caste communities who see her as a symbol of resistance against oppression. In 1983, she negotiates surrender, serves 10 years in prison. Upon release in 1994, she enters politics and wins a seat in Parliament. The former outlaw becomes a legislator championing laws against forced child marriage and caste-based discrimination, fighting from within the very system that had failed to protect her. Until 2001, when political rivals seeking revenge arrange her elimination outside her home. Here's the pattern you need to see. Each of these people started by believing in the system. They followed the rules. They trusted that justice would protect them, and the system responded by destroying everything they loved. So they made a choice, not to become criminals, but to become symbols, living rejections of the very idea that law equals justice. But here's the psychological trap. When you fight the system by becoming what it fears most, you don't destroy the system, you become its mirror. Lampião started by targeting the rich and ended by beheading innocents. Ned Kelly started by defending his family and ended in a shootout that killed bystanders. Phoolan Devi started by escaping abuse and ended by executing 22 men, some of whom may not have been directly involved. This is the dark truth about anti-heroes. They don't defeat the system, they prove its point. The authorities who preserved Lampião's head, the colonial government that hanged Ned Kelly, the upper caste politicians who killed Phoolan Devi, they all got to say, "See, this is what happens when you defy order. This is why we need control." So what's the actual outcome of their stories? Not victory, not justice, not even meaningful change, legend. Because that's what happens when the system crushes someone so publicly, so brutally, that their death becomes a story. They stop being a person and become a symbol. Lampião's head became a warning, but decades later, Brazilian folklore transformed him into a folk hero, a reminder that the powerful can be resisted, even if the cost is total. Ned Kelly's armor sits in museums now. His trial transcript reveals a system rigged against the poor. He lost his life, but his story exposed the corruption he railed against. Australia eventually had to reckon with what it did to people like him. Phoolan Devi got the strangest ending. She actually entered the system, became a lawmaker, tried to change things from within, and was murdered for it, because the system doesn't just kill rebels, it kills proof that the system can change. Here's the uncomfortable question. Did any of them actually fail? They died, but their stories lived, and their stories made millions of people ask, what kind of society creates people like this? That question is more dangerous to power than any bullet. The Roman philosopher Seneca wrote, "A sword never kills anybody, it is a tool in the killer's hand." But what if the real sword isn't the weapon? It's the system that decides who deserves to live and who deserves to be crushed. What if Lampião, Ned Kelly, and Phoolan Devi weren't killers who picked up sword, but tools the system created through its own cruelty? Because here's what every society refuses to admit. Monsters aren't born, they're forged, and the furnace is injustice. When a system becomes so corrupt that it punishes goodness and rewards brutality, it doesn't just create criminals, it creates martyrs, people whose very existence becomes a moral indictment. And the worst part? The system knows this. That's why they decapitated Lampião and tore his head. That's why they hanged Ned Kelly despite 32,000 signatures. That's why Phoolan Devi was assassinated after she tried to work within the system. Because the system doesn't fear violence, it fears inspiration. It fears the moment when people stop seeing criminals and start seeing consequences. So here's your takeaway. Every society tells itself a story about law and order, about good guys and bad guys, about how the system protects the innocent. But Lampião, Ned Kelly and Phoolan Devi are proof that this story is a lie we tell ourselves to sleep at night. Because the uncomfortable truth is, when you dig into any criminal, you often find someone the system failed first. The boy whose father was murdered by corrupt police. The child forced into hard labor for a crime he didn't commit. The girl raped by the very officers meant to protect her. And when enough people are failed, something dangerous happens. They stop fearing punishment. They start welcoming it as proof, because being punished by a corrupt system isn't shame, it's validation. It's proof you were dangerous enough to matter. So the next time someone asks you, why do people cheer for criminals? The answer isn't that people love violence. It's that people recognize themselves in the person who finally stopped playing by rules designed to break them. And that recognition, that moment when someone looks at an outlaw and thinks, I understand why, that's the moment the system should be most afraid. Because it means the furnace is still burning, and it's only a matter of time before someone else steps into the flame. The system doesn't fear your anger, it fears your understanding.